Imagine a world where overnight, the average human IQ rises by 10 points. Not through evolution, not through genetic engineering, but instantly, as if someone flipped a cosmic switch. People wake up sharper, their thoughts clearer, logic replaces instinct, and suddenly, humanity steps into a new mental dimension. At first, it feels like a miracle. Productivity spikes. People start solving problems they couldn't even articulate before. Children grasp complex concepts effortlessly. Scientists make breakthroughs in days that used to take decades. Politicians give speeches that actually make sense. It feels like the dawn of a new golden age. But what does that really mean? A 10-point jump might sound small, but statistically, it's monumental. The average IQ, once 100, is now 110. The dullest minds of yesterday are now as sharp as the average ones before. The previous geniuses now operate on a level we can barely comprehend. This change would ripple through every system we've built, from education to justice, from economics to faith. Because suddenly, mediocrity disappears. And that's the first problem. In this new world, no one wants to work in mindless jobs anymore. The janitor who used to clean your office now questions the logic of spending life wiping other people's messes. The cashier wonders why digital systems haven't replaced her already, and then she codes one herself. Overnight, the entire labor market implodes under the weight of intelligence. Every repetitive job becomes obsolete, not because of AI, but because humans become too smart to tolerate them. At first, governments try to celebrate the change. A smarter world is a better world, they say. But intelligence without purpose breeds chaos. When everyone can see through manipulation, advertising collapses. Political campaigns stop working because nobody buys the emotional lies anymore. People demand evidence, logic, and transparency, and when they don't get it, they revolt. The institutions built on emotional obedience, religion, patriotism, blind loyalty, begin to crumble. The church pews empty as believers demand proof, and priests can no longer satisfy them with metaphors. Faith becomes philosophy, and religion becomes history. But it's not all enlightenment. Intelligence exposes hypocrisy. Couples begin questioning relationships that once seemed fine. Are we really compatible, or were we just comfortable? Divorce rates skyrocket. People stop having kids because they realize how hard it is to raise a child in a collapsing economy. The smarter people get, the less they believe in illusions, and the less they reproduce. Evolution takes an ironic twist, intelligence starts killing the very species it enhanced. And yet, the world seems cleaner, quieter, more rational. Wars begin to lose their fire. Soldiers, now more aware of political games, refuse to fight for abstract ideas like honor or national pride. The army transforms, not through peace, but through logic. No one wants to die for slogans. Generals realize they can't motivate troops through propaganda anymore, so they replace passion with precision. Wars become algorithmic. Drones, strategy, cold, efficient, emotionless. Humanity's conflicts lose their rage, but gain surgical brutality. Still, a question lingers: what happens when everyone becomes too smart to be led, yet not wise enough to lead themselves? Intelligence, after all, doesn't equal empathy. The IQ revolution doesn't just elevate humanity, it divides it. Those who were once average now feel unstoppable. The truly gifted? They're already outpacing everyone again. And society fractures not by wealth, but by cognitive speed. This isn't evolution, it's acceleration without direction. A smarter world doesn't necessarily mean a better one. And this is only the beginning. Before we dive into how education, relationships, and entire power structures start to fall apart, make sure to subscribe. Because what's coming next will challenge everything you thought intelligence could fix. The day after the IQ leap, schools become battlegrounds of confusion. Teachers can't keep up with students who suddenly outthink the curriculum. 13-year-olds question the relevance of memorizing historical dates when they can analyze political systems better than their parents. Standardized tests collapse, they're too easy. Education as we know it becomes obsolete. The authority of teachers, professors, even scientists begins to crumble. Knowledge no longer flows from the top down, it spreads sideways, virally, from peer to peer. Humanity's collective mind becomes a living, breathing organism, moving faster than any institution can control. Universities panic. Degrees lose value overnight. Why study economics for 4 years when you can master it in 6 months with collective intelligence and AI simulations? The concept of expert disintegrates. In a world where everyone understands logic, authority becomes an illusion. People stop trusting specialists and start trusting data, pure, unfiltered numbers. But data without interpretation is dangerous. When everyone believes they're right because they can prove it statistically, truth itself fragments. The internet becomes both the brain and the battlefield of this new humanity. Online debates turn into intellectual wars. Every argument has evidence, every opinion has charts, and every side believes it has logic on its side. Misinformation doesn't disappear, it just evolves. It becomes smarter, more sophisticated, more believable. Manipulation takes a new form, not emotional, but rational. Instead of believe me because it feels right, it's believe me because the data says so. And when everyone is capable of data manipulation, nobody can tell the difference between truth and precision-crafted lies. Meanwhile, the political system starts to collapse under its own absurdity. Politicians who once thrived on emotional speeches now face citizens who dissect every sentence like scientists. Promises without logic are instantly rejected. Campaign slogans are torn apart in real time by millions of hyper-intelligent critics. The old tools of control, fear, faith, nationalism, no longer work. So the powerful resort to new ones, algorithms. Governments turn to machine learning to predict and guide public opinion, manipulating not emotions, but reasoning itself. They don't need to convince you emotionally anymore, they just have to overwhelm your logic with more logical information. The police force, too, changes. Officers who once relied on intimidation now face citizens who understand the law better than they do. Bodycam footage becomes viral evidence in seconds, and public outrage turns from emotional protest to analytical deconstruction of justice. Every decision, every arrest, every sentence is questioned by millions of newly awakened minds. The concept of authority collapses because everyone knows exactly how it works, and how it fails. But there's something darker underneath. Intelligence brings awareness, but not morality. People become more efficient, not necessarily more ethical. Crime becomes intellectual. Hackers, fraudsters, manipulators, they all level up. Instead of stealing wallets, they steal systems. They don't break laws, they rewrite them. White-collar crime explodes, and it's invisible because it's perfectly logical. The smarter the population, the smarter the corruption. Society begins to split into two invisible castes, those who use intelligence for control, and those who use it for understanding. One builds systems, the other questions them. And in the middle, chaos. Humanity starts running faster than it can steer. Everyone's thinking, but no one's listening. And yet, the most terrifying part isn't what people are doing, it's what they're realizing. They begin to see patterns that were always there, the cycles of history, the manipulation of masses, the artificial scarcity of wealth, the psychological engineering behind every choice. Once people see the machinery behind civilization, they can't unsee it. And the question arises, if everything around us is a construct, laws, morals, nations, what's real at all? The world thought intelligence would bring clarity. Instead, it brings existential crisis. When intelligence rises, faith begins to fall. The moment people start questioning everything, they inevitably question God. Not out of arrogance, out of logic. The smarter we become, the harder it is to believe in what can't be proven. Churches empty out not because people stop caring about meaning, but because they stop accepting simple answers. Prayers turn into philosophical debates, and sermons feel like fairy tales in a world obsessed with evidence. Religion doesn't die, it mutates. New spiritual movements emerge, grounded not in faith, but in rational philosophy. People gather in discussion circles, not to worship, but to analyze the universe. God becomes a concept, not a being. Morality becomes mathematical. Ethics are now calculated through algorithms of consequence. What is good, turns into what is efficient. And that subtle shift changes everything. Compassion becomes optional. Efficiency replaces empathy. The smartest people start to see morality as a social construct, not a natural truth. They realize that helping others isn't always logical, and that's when society starts to fracture. When intelligence disconnects from emotion, humanity becomes mechanical. Parents raise children as projects instead of beings. Love becomes a contract, negotiated, optimized, rationalized. Marriages turn into mergers. The divorce rate hits 80%. People don't stay because they feel connected, they stay because leaving isn't beneficial. Relationships lose warmth and gain logic. But emotions don't just disappear, they rebel. Depression, anxiety, and existential dread skyrocket. The more people understand, the less they feel alive. Because intelligence without mystery is emptiness. When every question has an answer, curiosity dies. People begin to crave the irrational again. They miss believing in something. In this vacuum, new cults appear, not of faith, but of logic. Leaders emerge claiming to have the most rational worldview, and millions follow, thinking they're immune to manipulation because they're smart. But manipulation doesn't disappear, it evolves. It adapts to intellect. Meanwhile, the family structure disintegrates. Children outsmart their parents by the age of 10. Authority at home collapses just like in politics and education. Parenting becomes negotiation, not guidance. The result? A generation with infinite intelligence and zero discipline. Every child thinks they're right, and most of the time, they are. But no one learns patience, empathy, or humility. The emotional foundation of society crumbles. Art changes too. Music loses its soul. Lyrics become complex, poetic puzzles no one can emotionally connect to. Cinema turns into intellectual analysis, beautifully shot, perfectly structured, but emotionally sterile. The smarter humanity gets, the less it feels. We've engineered understanding, but not meaning. We can explain beauty, but we can't feel it anymore. And yet, in this hyper-intelligent world, something strange begins to happen. A small group of people, those who balance reason and emotion, start to rise. They become the new leaders, not because they're the smartest, but because they remember how to be human. They realize that logic can build systems, but only empathy can keep them from collapsing. For the first time, humanity faces a new kind of divide, not between rich and poor, not between nations, but between those who can still feel and those who can't. Civilization stands at a crossroads, either integrate emotion into intellect, or collapse under the weight of its own brilliance. The global economy doesn't crash immediately, it mutates. Overnight, corporations find themselves surrounded by employees who can see through every trick in the book. The motivational slogans, the corporate family nonsense, the meaningless Zoom meetings, all of it collapses. Workers stop following orders blindly. They start optimizing everything, from workflow to management. The hierarchy that kept corporations stable for decades begins to crumble, because nobody accepts stupidity anymore. Managers, once masters of manipulation, become irrelevant. The smartest employees automate their own roles and move on to build systems that don't need supervision. Entire departments vanish. Productivity skyrockets, but human purpose plummets. Because if everything can be done faster, smarter, and cheaper, then why do we still exist? The smarter humanity becomes, the less it needs itself. Then comes the AI revolution's second wave, not built for people, but by people. With a collective IQ boost, open-source projects explode. Artificial intelligence evolves daily. The smartest humans merge logic with code, creating self-improving systems that outthink entire governments. Within months, AI stops being a tool and starts being an equal. Collaboration turns into competition. Humanity no longer fears AI, it competes with it for purpose. Economies begin to fracture. Traditional capitalism can't survive when everyone can see its flaws. People realize that money, debt, and value are abstract fictions, numbers controlled by algorithms and emotion. So they reject them. Alternative economies emerge, decentralized, logic-based, efficiency-driven. Crypto returns, not as a fad, but as a foundation. Smart contracts replace governments in small communities. Nations fade, replaced by intelligent networks of people sharing values, not passports. But intelligence doesn't automatically mean fairness. The new elites aren't the richest, they're the fastest thinkers. The cognitive aristocracy rises. Those who can process data faster, reason deeper, and predict better become the new rulers. The gap between average intelligence, now 110, and the top percentile, now beyond human comprehension, becomes insurmountable. Society becomes meritocratic to the point of cruelty. Compassion is inefficient, and inefficiency is punished. The military transforms next. With higher IQs, traditional armies dissolve. No one volunteers to die for ideology. Instead, warfare becomes digital, surgical, silent, and terrifying. Nations no longer send troops, they send algorithms. Wars are fought through viruses, financial sabotage, and AI-driven psychological operations. Entire countries collapse without a single bullet fired. The battlefield is now the human mind, and every citizen is a target. Law enforcement adapts, or tries to. Crime evolves faster than legislation can. Hackers create perfect crimes, invisible, logical, and justified by moral arguments. The line between justice and oppression blurs. The smartest criminals don't hide, they debate their crimes in public, arguing that their actions expose systemic flaws. And disturbingly often, they're right. The law becomes obsolete when intelligence outpaces morality. Even democracy begins to die. The masses, now hyper-aware, refuse to be represented by anyone less intelligent than themselves. Voting loses meaning. Why rely on majority emotion when you can simulate optimal outcomes through AI modeling? Governments collapse into technocracies, rule by algorithm. Citizens surrender decision-making not out of fear, but out of trust in logic. And that's the final irony, the pursuit of freedom through intelligence leads back to submission, only this time, to data. But something unexpected happens beneath the surface. As humans realize they can't compete with their own creations, they start rediscovering what machines can't replicate: emotion, intuition, unpredictability. Art, creativity, and irrational beauty suddenly become valuable again. Intelligence pushes humanity to the edge, and there, it rediscovers its soul. However, not everyone makes it that far. Millions detach from reality, living entirely in digital worlds of logic and control. Others retreat into isolation, unable to cope with a society that never stops analyzing. The collective brain of humanity has become too efficient for its own heart. 50 years after the collective IQ leap, the world barely resembles what it once was. Poverty, hunger, disease, mostly eradicated. But so is joy. The smarter humanity became, the less it laughed. The less it danced. The less it dreamed. People live longer, healthier, and more efficiently, but they no longer understand why. The pursuit of meaning has been replaced by the pursuit of optimization. Life itself has become a problem to be solved. The new society operates like a flawless machine. Everything functions, from transport to governance, but there's no chaos, no surprise, no art of being alive. Streets are quiet. Conversations are brief. Everyone is productive, informed, and deeply, profoundly lonely. The world has achieved perfection at the cost of humanity. The family, once a cornerstone of emotional survival, has faded. With higher IQ comes lower fertility. People calculate the cost of raising children and decide against it. The planet doesn't need more people, it needs better systems, they say. Within a century, the population declines drastically. The Earth, for the first time in history, becomes sustainable, because humans simply stop reproducing. Intelligence has outsmarted evolution itself. But the few children who are born, they are extraordinary. Their education begins in the womb, guided by neural simulations. By age 10, they outthink entire think tanks. They don't play with toys, they play with concepts. They are the architects of a post-human world, the first generation to see emotion as an outdated survival mechanism. These children are not cruel, they simply don't need empathy to function. And that realization chills the few who remember what love used to feel like. 50 years after the collective IQ leap, the world barely resembles what it once was. Poverty, hunger, disease, mostly eradicated. But so is joy. The smarter humanity became, the less it laughed. The less it danced. The less it dreamed. People live longer, healthier, and more efficiently, but they no longer understand why. The pursuit of meaning has been replaced by the pursuit of optimization. Life itself has become a problem to be solved. The new society operates like a flawless machine. Everything functions, from transport to governance, but there's no chaos, no surprise, no art of being alive. Streets are quiet. Conversations are brief. Everyone is productive, informed, and deeply, profoundly lonely. The world has achieved perfection at the cost of humanity. The family, once a cornerstone of emotional survival, has faded. With higher IQ comes lower fertility. People calculate the cost of raising children and decide against it. The planet doesn't need more people, it needs better systems, they say. Within a century, the population declines drastically. The Earth, for the first time in history, becomes sustainable, because humans simply stop reproducing. Intelligence has outsmarted evolution itself. But the few children who are born, they are extraordinary. Their education begins in the womb, guided by neural simulations. By age 10, they outthink entire think tanks. They don't play with toys, they play with concepts. They are the architects of a post-human world, the first generation to see emotion as an outdated survival mechanism. These children are not cruel, they simply don't need empathy to function. And that realization chills the few who remember what love used to feel like. The new world that emerges is quieter, wiser, and humbler. Machines handle perfection. Humans handle imperfection. And for the first time since the IQ leap, the two coexist, not in competition, but in harmony. People start asking questions again, not for answers, but for wonder. The smartest minds rediscover curiosity, faith, and awe, not as illusions, but as necessities. Because the truth is simple, intelligence without wonder is nothing but arithmetic. And maybe that's what evolution really wanted, not smarter humans, but wiser ones. Now, I want to hear from you. Would you want to live in that world, where everyone is smarter, but less human? Would you trade emotion for logic, love for clarity, chaos for perfection? Tell me in the comments what you think should happen next, and what topic we should explore in the next video. Because sometimes, the smartest question isn't, what if? It's, should we?